The year 1983 would start off with a bang for Thatcher and her administration with mass nationwide protests against nuclear weapons by the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament in response to her agreement with Ronald Reagan to allow the U.S. to station 160 cruise missiles on Great Britain. This discontent would also be felt in the labor industry as continued mass layoffs from the industrial restructuring put many out of work. The British coal mining industry under the NCB saw employment in the sector drop from 1 million in 1974 to just 230,000 by 1984. All of the easy-to-get domestic coal was gone, and British coal was now 25% more expensive than international coal due to labor and equipment costs, forcing many mines to close. With the threat of more mine closures on the horizon, miners across the country participated in the 1984 miners' strike. Thatcher played tough by refusing to negotiate with the strikers, causing the strike to go on with no resolution. The strike would lead to the loss of 26 million manpower hours and ultimately speed up the collapse of the sorry remains of the British coal industry. That year, Thatcher would also pass the Telecommunications Act of 1984, which privatized British Telecom and created the Office of Telecommunications, Oftel, as a new regulatory industry which was in line with her efforts for a pivot to more free markets. At this point, many groups within British society despised Thatcher, and some even wanted her dead. That October, Thatcher was staying at a hotel in Brighton in preparation for that year's Conservative conference. Knowing this information, Provo terrorists planted a delayed time bomb in the hotel to attempt to assassinate her in retribution for her treatment of the Irish prisoners who went on hunger strike 3 years prior. The bombing killed 5 people but failed to harm Thatcher, who insisted on proceeding with her speech the next day as planned, an act which further increased her popularity amongst mainstream English, widening an opinion divide between them and the various minority groups. The bomber was named Patrick McGee, who was subsequently caught using his fingerprints and sentenced to life in prison. The Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984 acknowledged that the UK's 99-year lease on Hong Kong would be expiring in 1997, and both nations came to an understanding that the UK would accept a peaceful and effortless transition of the island back to China so long as Hong Kong could maintain its status as a special administrative region with additional democratic rights under the one country, two systems policy. Thatcher would continue her diplomacy efforts with the signing of the 1985 Anglo-Irish Agreement, which represented a desire to end the violence of the Troubles, and saw Ireland and the UK agree to a memorandum of understanding that Northern Ireland would remain a part of the UK unless democratically changed through popular action, but did, however, concede for the first time the Irish government's position in an advisory role for the territory. This slight change caused 150,000 angry Ulsters to swarm Belfast in opposition to increased Irish involvement in an event known as the Ulster Says No protest. Ian Gow was a hardline conservative member of Parliament who supported Thatcher and was an outspoken proponent of greater cooperation between England and Northern Ireland, and as a result of the agreement reached, chose to resign from Parliament. Gow would later be assassinated by a car bomb planted in his driveway in 1990 by the IRA as a response to his vocal support for Ulster causes. A resignation would strike Thatcher's own cabinet when Westland, the UK's only remaining domestic manufacturer of helicopters, required outside investment due to financial difficulties. While Thatcher's defense secretary suggested a partnership with peer Italian firm Augusta, Thatcher ignored him and made the unilateral decision to accept investment from the American firm Sarkozy, leading to his resignation due to what he perceived as an unfair bidding process. While the UK had been in the European Economic Community for going on 12 years now, as part of a renegotiation of member terms with the signing of the Single European Act of 1985, Thatcher was able to secure a major concession in the form of the UK rebate, which was a complex financial calculation to return some of the taxes the UK paid into the system due to oversized contributions to revenue and undersized reliance on services. Thatcher continued her privatization tear with the signing of the Gas Act of 1986, which privatized British Gas and created the Office of Gas Supply, Ofgas, to regulate the new private industry. This was followed by the so-called Big Bang, which on October 27th of 1986, the London Stock Exchange went through major deregulation, creating a major boom in trading and registrations, leading LSEG to become the most dominant exchange until about 2006, when the craze of American mortgage-backed securities finally took its place. The Big Bang led to outsized massive corporate growth being funneled to London, cementing its place as the premier global financial market, which could be seen by the development of the perpetually marshy Isle of Dogs Peninsula in London into an entirely new central business district known as the Canary Wharf. The following year, the UK lost the semi-autonomous Dominion of Fiji in a 1987 coup to little fanfare. Amongst this backdrop of the continual erosion of British hard power, increasing relevance in global finance and soft power emerged with a resurgence of the popularity of British music artists across the West, popularized by the advent of MTV videos, which instigated a period known as the Second British Invasion, where British artists such as Duran Duran, Soft Cell, A Flock of Seagulls, and Billy Idol dominated the US charts. Tragedy struck in 1988 when Pan Am Flight 103 exploded over Scotland due to a bomb that had been planted on board, killing all 259 passengers in addition to 11 people on the ground at the point of impact. What became known as the Lockerbie bombing is the deadliest terrorist attack in British history and is also one of the most absurd cover-ups. The official story, what you will find on Wikipedia, is that Muammar Gaddafi sent Libyan terrorists to bomb the plane in an escalation of his previous military support of the IRA. The rest of allied European intelligence agencies refuted this claim and stated that they had clear evidence that Syria, led by Assad, in conjunction with Iran, were behind the attack. The situation in that part of the Middle East was already a powder keg at the time due to the Iran-Iraq War, that the US and the UK agreed to shift blame to the rather irrelevant Libya, which was a safe distance away from the conflict. Gaddafi became the perfect boogeyman for Thatcher and Reagan, and he was punished with hefty sanctions which crippled his country's economy. Not everyone in British society, however, was oblivious to the gross cover-up which was occurring. Businessman Tiny Rowland was the chief voice and financial backer to try and uncover the truth behind the bombing. Tiny, earning his nickname for his large size, was born in Calcutta, India during World War I to German and Dutch parents who had been settlers in the area until they were interned as prisoners of war. Because he was born on British soil, Tiny automatically became a British citizen, something the family would take advantage of in 1937 when they moved to the UK from Germany due to the family's strong political disagreement to Nazism. As an adult, Tiny would become a sort of modern day Cecil Rhodes. He moved to Africa to become an adventurer business tycoon, eventually becoming CEO of the large corporate mining conglomerate Lonrho, which stands for London Rhodesia, where he became known for shady accounting practices and workers' rights abuses. While Tiny lived in Africa, he was contacted and agreed to become an MI6 informant, becoming privy to some classified information. He had plans to expand Lonrho's business operations into Libya until the Lockerbie bombing smear campaign, and the ensuing sanctions made his investments into the country worthless. Enraged, Tiny would spend years financing a film called The Maltese Double Cross, which was an investigative documentary that outlined the case for why Libya had been wrongly accused. Sadly for Tiny, the film would never be shown publicly in the UK as it was banned by the government upon its release in 1994, and he was, as a result of the negative publicity, forced to step down from Lonrho in a boardroom coup orchestrated by fellow corporate raider, the infamous German Dieter Bach. Back in the 1980s, Tiny was shifting his focus and time back in London, becoming a central figure in the corporate raiders' culture of the time, participating in leveraged buyouts, most famously taking a controlling stake in the British newspaper The Observer. He was well on his way to having Lonrho, through its retail subsidiary House of Fraser, take a controlling stake in the world-renowned Harrods department store in London, until House of Fraser was seized in a hostile takeover by one of Tiny's former partners at Lonrho, Mohammed Al Fayed. Born in Egypt as just Fayed, and adding the prefix to give an air of prestige, Muhammad was a mysterious character who is difficult to pin down as to whether he is a con man, asset for CIA, or various Arab intelligence agencies, or both. He married Samira Khashoggi, sister to the key player in the Iran-Contra scandal, and moved to London one day with $650 million to begin purchasing prized real estate with seemingly no backstory to how he acquired the money. Another interesting CIA connection to him was back in 1964. Al-Fayed had moved to Haiti briefly, along with George de Mohrenschildt, the CIA agent who housed Lee Harvey Oswald and his wife when they moved to the States. The business pair were attempting to convince the leader of Haiti to cancel his contract with U.S. oil producers and instead sign a 50-year lease over to Al Fayed, something he did, but the partnership dried up rather quickly when it was discovered Haiti had no commercial quantities of oil. In many ways, Al Fayed acted like Jeffrey Epstein did, in that he positioned himself as an elite financial advisor for royalty, such as the likes of the Sultan of Brunei, whom he personally convinced to loan the Thatcher government money. Tiny was livid that Al Fayed came out from under him to purchase Harrods, and in 1985 he launched a multi-year investigative report to uncover the truth that Al Fayed had lied about the origins of his wealth when going through the legal process of purchasing Harrods. Unfortunately for Tiny, repeated defeats into the last decade of the 20th century would show that his old ways of operating as a tycoon were no longer relevant, and he would pass away discreetly in 1998 of old age. In 1988, Thatcher gave her infamous Bruges speech where she made it known her opposition to any transition of the European Economic Community into the EU or other body with increased centralization. Her cabinet, however, forced her to accept entry into the European exchange rate mechanism in 1990, which was a semi-peg system of European currencies meant to encourage increased cross-border commerce. Thatcher encouraged further privatization with the passage of the Electricity Act of 1989, which privatized power generation and created the Office of Electricity Regulation, OFER, as a regulating body, and the Water Act of 1989, which privatized municipal water systems and created the National River Authority to help regulate the water quality of the nation's rivers and streams. The outcomes of the privatization of the 1980s is mixed, with some of the many companies managing to unlock greater efficiencies in the open market with a subset of public goods which struggle to become profitable, showcasing their low viability as a private enterprise. While Thatcher preferred less regulation over British business, she did have a passion for the environment, and in 1990 she signed the Environmental Protection Act, which added additional emission standards, increased the regulation of commercial and industrial waste, set fines for littering, required foods containing GMO ingredients to be labeled as such, and set up the regional agencies of English Nature, Nature Scott, and the Countryside Council for Wales to protect local wildlife and habitats. Thatcher also established the Hadley Center, named for English meteorologist George Hadley, who had discovered a scientific explanation for trade winds, to study climate change, located at the Met Office, short for meteorological, in Exeter. That year, however, Thatcher would make her gravest mistake with the creation of the poll tax, which was a local tax that replaced residential property taxes. Its official name was the community charge, although this was rarely used. The tax was regressive and was based on a flat tax per head, and it was uniformly despised, causing it to be repealed the following year. The passage of the poll tax caused widespread riots to once again spread across Britain, with the largest demonstration occurring in London's Trafalgar Square. It was later discovered that Thatcher herself had failed to register for the poll tax while in office, meaning she ended up owing back taxes. After a speech was leaked of her belittling the German people for not being worthy of reunification, her popularity fell even further, and she was forced to resign, being followed by fellow conservative John Major. Although the newly deregulated economy was running hot, so was inflation, which had persistently been stuck at a whopping 15%. On September 16th, 1992, the UK suffered a currency crisis on a day which became known as Black Wednesday. When the UK joined the European exchange rate mechanism, they semi-pegged to the pound to the Deutschmark, which was seen as stable at the time. German reunification was causing inflation, so Germany raised interest rates to cool the economy by selling bonds, causing the value of the Deutschmark to increase to an unsustainable level for the British economy. The eventual decoupling of the currencies triggered a forced exit of the pound from the exchange rate mechanism, causing a sudden drop in the value of the currency down to its real level. In one of his most famous trades, Jewish American investor George Soros foresaw this decline and shorted the pound, ultimately running off with $1 billion. In November 1992, a fire broke out at Windsor Castle, badly damaging the property. Elizabeth II decided to pay tax on her income to help pay for its restoration. something which opened the door for Major to pass reform by beginning to collect tax on all royals' earned income. The next year, Major privatized one of the few remaining industries which survived under Thatcher, the railroads, with the passage of the Railways Act of 1993, which reformed the British Railways Board and ultimately created the new private entity British Rail. By 1994, however, the underpinnings of Major's conservative government began to falter upon the breaking of a series of damaging scandals, the most notable being the Cash for Questions affair. The scandal involved none other than Mohammed Fayed, who was illegally bribing conservative members of parliament to bring up debate and questioning of legislation favorable to Harrods and Fayed's other business interests. Fayed claimed he didn't know bribery was illegal and no charges were brought upon anyone, but the event greatly aided the image that Major's administration was corrupt. The success of British music internationally continued into the 1990s with new wave Britpop, which included popular artists such as Oasis, Blur, and the Spice Girls. The popularity of this music contributed to the creation of the Cool Britannia phenomenon that occurred domestically among young adults who began to emulate the 60s counterculture in reaction to decades of conservative stagnation. Almost prophetically, in the 1997 election, the conservatives were obliterated, being followed by Labour's Tony Blair. Tony Blair had been quietly rising through the ranks of the Labour Party since the start of the decade, advocating his view that the elements of socialism that were present in British society had become obsolete in an era of ever-growing abundance and technology being achieved through free market capitalism. He instead argued that Labour should distinguish itself from the Conservatives by taking a progressive stance on social issues and championing diversity. The openness of the new movement was shown in Blair's choice of co-architect of his new platform, Peter Mandelson, who himself was one of the first openly gay members of Parliament. Joining them was Alistair Campbell, a journalist and political editor at the Daily Mirror, who specialized in the art of democratic propaganda. Campbell's oratory skills led Blair to putting him in charge as the movement's media and communications strategy, eventually becoming the press secretary. Blair would emphatically state that Campbell was a genius after he coined the moniker New Labour to distinguish the new platform of social progress against the backdrop of a wider separation from the labor movement as its relevance waned, ensuring viability for the Labour Party into the 21st century.